Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the show today. On today's show, we're going to be talking about how do we keep up with AI without burning out or perhaps missing the forest for the trees, like Allie K recently talked about on a recent TikTok of hers. We're gonna show that on the show as well. We're going from days of AI can't seem to put five fingers on a hand to multi-agent solutions using model context protocol, and as of yesterday, even agent to agent by Google, which is really interesting as well. So you have all these things coming at us every single day, and the pace is just picking up. So today's show is really just about like how do we keep our priorities in check, which is a lot about what Ali talked about on her TikTok, while also maintaining focus on these model to model changes, 3.5 and Claude to 3.7. What does that mean? But we don't, as she was talking about, don't want to miss the forest for the trees or focusing on a leaf in that forest and missing the larger priorities. So that's what today's show is about. It's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a great conversation. This is the Daily AI Show. We're here every weekday, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. You can join us in the conversation by coming over to YouTube and just looking for the live show. And then you can join us in the comments. We already have tons of people in the comments right now saying hi and hello. Welcome to everybody there. On the show with me today to have this discussion, we have Beth, Junmi, Andy, and I am Brian. And yeah, I got to say, I'm excited about this one. It feels like kind of a Monday type conversation on a Thursday, which is sort of fun. And for anybody in the background, we typically have these sort of like broader open type conversations. We will typically schedule those on Monday. So I kind of feel like we got a bonus this week because we just got to have a fun conversation. But I think maybe just opening conversation here. And Andy, since you're back with us today, maybe a start with you is, how do you see this? Obviously you've been in this with us. Well, we've all known each other now for like two solid years, and even more than that, I think. If I had to guess, January of 03 is when we probably 2023 is when we all probably started being aware of each other inside the AI exchange, the Slack community. So in those 2 years, like how have you seen this evolution? Maybe compare it to your past experiences and work experiences, and like how do you feel like you keep hanging on to the back of a truck bumper that is just accelerating downhill and the road's getting bumpier as you go? Like, how do you feel like we navigate this
Uh,
outside, obviously, the Daily Eye show?
yeah, we have the benefit of having attended to this on a routine and regular basis uh, for a long arc of a trajectory toward what we all believe is ultimately going to be something like a human like intelligence that's represented to all of us as AGI or superintelligence that goes beyond that. And yeah, I think that if I think back across that arc, there is a leveling off of some of the advances that we monitor, and that has largely to do with performance on benchmarks. Like the AIs haven't yet gotten to the point where they just absolutely ace everything, but they're so close, so high and complete on their accomplishments that we if we jumped back 2 years, we'd say, wow, it's only going to take us 2 years to get to that level of comprehension in models and conversation with models. So that's reaching a point where I'm starting to agree with the idea that scaling compute in pre-training is not giving commensurate advances in the model's capabilities. But again, the model's capabilities are so astonishing to me now, and there's so many examples on a day-to-day basis where I'm just really satisfied. I'm not complacent. I definitely want them to continue to improve, but wow, they're already at a level where I'm very satisfied with those things. So that progression, I think, is reaching a point of completion, and in fact, we're seeing a conversion from that effort to try to get to AGI to something that's more potentially more important for the sort of the spread of applications of AI, and that is shrinking the size of the models in order to reduce the inference cost, and doing that with methods that don't require enormous, $100 billion investments in pre-training of a frontier model. So there's several different approaches that are being taken with that. One of them is that um, they're starting to do model distillation. So take an existing model and distill it down to a smaller model that still nonetheless retains most of the capabilities of that larger, very expensive to train and to provide inference compute for. Because the larger the model, the 30 trillion parameters of Llama 4, it costs a lot of money to run tokens through 30 million parameters or 30 trillion parameters, right? And if you have a much smaller model that can get, 90% of the way there of Llama 4, then that's going to cost much less to run your tokens in your query through that model. So there's distillation to create new models of smaller scale that have reasoning capabilities, pretty much consistent with what the large frontier models are. And then also what's happening at the same time, which has a countervailing effect on the actual cost of inference, is test time compute. So you apply to a reasoning model the opportunity to use many more tokens at the time of its going through a process of thinking, and that's going to increase your cost of inference, but it can be done by a much smaller model. So that the smaller models with reasoning capabilities distilled from the larger models, you can afford now to spend tokens on their iterative reasoning process. And I want to just give you a way to look at that and just pick any one of the now multiple deep research models out there that report back to you its process of thinking. And you can see how it's planning and executing a succession of quite agentic efforts to arrive at not only a way to solve the question that you've asked it to do deep research about, but exploring all the different facets and angles that it has to address to do that. And it reports those back as it's going through that many second process. And during that time, 25 seconds, 5 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, it's burning tokens through its model. So this isn't like advancing the capability of the model. It's actually exploiting the already inherent capabilities of the models and distilling them down. And there's some news actually just yesterday about a company called, let me see if I can find it. This is a company that's just launched a new approach. It's called Multiverse. Multiverse, and it's not related to the multiverse that Meta is about, right?
Which you have to wonder, why go with multiverse? But keep going.
It's called Multiverse with Jarvis, right? Like
like that, yeah. So Multiverse, already back in 2024, they announced their approach to this, and it's called Compactify, with AI at the end, Compactify. So what they're doing is they're identifying in a very deep neural network which layers aren't really necessary if you're applying reasoning, or are really not as effective as other layers, and then compressing the model to eliminate those layers. And this has to do with an assumption, or maybe a presumption, that the deeper layers in a really large $30 trillion model tend to be ineffective at generating better responses against benchmarks or in satisfying your queries. So what they're doing is they're compressing those models. So here's some statistics. They took the Llama models, the 70 billion model and the 3 billion model, and they used their methodology of identifying which layers are not as effective in arriving at reasoning capabilities. And by the way, just yesterday, Brian was mentioning that or one of you was mentioning as I was watching, that many of the advanced models, like the newly released Nematron model from NVIDIA, are based on the Llama models. So now they took the Llama models and they compressed them by 80% without sacrificing accuracy, right? They have 60% fewer parameters, and Multiverse is demonstrating that they perform pretty much as well as the full 70 billion model on the benchmarks. So these are the kinds of advancements that, okay, I didn't know anything about this approach yesterday, until today, or yesterday, I actually learned about it. But I mean, before yesterday, I didn't know about that. But how do you keep abreast of those kinds of things and chart the probable changes in trajectory toward where we're going? And this is saying to me that what's going to happen next is we're going to get smaller and smaller models that can be on your phone or in edge devices that are performing as well with reasoning capabilities as the large frontier models are. So that's my thoughts about this trajectory that we're on. But I want to just say, I don't see how I can even keep up, even with the level of attention that I'm paying to it, because there's so many parts of this. Junmi, you're an expert in the arena of media-oriented AI, whether it's image or video or voice. All of those things I don't really pay much attention to, because I'm more interested in the multi-agent architectures that are emerging. So we had mixture of models, like the mixture of assistants built into a single model. And now we're going to have multiple agents. And I've been working, as you probably all know, on vibe coding and using these multi-agent systems where I can just talk to it and it's doing a lot of things behind the scenes that I don't even see.
Yeah.
I can go look at it, but it's doing a lot of things behind the scenes that I don't see. And that, I think, is the future. And the only way to catch up and be a part of it is to start talking to those models that can do that.
Yeah. I think too, it's also like time and attention and just playing, right? Allowing yourself to play and poke here and poke there, and realizing that, maybe this 30 minutes of playing with AI tools or something may not uncover or unlock some new ability or something, but cumulatively, just like people listen to the show. And by the way, thank you, Cisco, for the kind comment. He was saying earlier, he's like, guys, the Daily AI Show is how I stay and I don't get like burnt out on this stuff. I listen to the show. Thank you. That is, by the way, the intent, not to pat ourselves on the back. That was the entire intent of this show, was that I kind of raised my hand early, and then everybody else that's involved in the show quickly joined in when I said, hey, basically what I said out in a Slack message was like, does anybody want to do this crazy idea of a daily show? That was part of it. But also, like, does anybody else kind of feel like if we don't talk about this daily, we won't be able to stay on top of it? And we all collectively had that same feeling of, yeah, you know what? Let's do a show where we get together once a day and we have these conversations, because we all need it. And also it's 100% for me, just like it is for hopefully our audience, it's the accountability partner, not even physically like you guys being an accountability partner, because I don't want to let you guys down in a conversation either. I don't want to show up unprepared. There's that side of it, or for the audience, but just the accountability of like, oh, we have this topic coming up and I need to better understand it than I do right now. And then knowing I can come to the conversation and go, I have a good wrap on this, but I know, man, Andy or Beth or Jumi or Aaron or Carl are gonna put a different spin on this, and I'm gonna walk away and go, that clicked for me. That Beth said it, didn't get it. Jumi said it, didn't get it. Andy said it, got it. And then, vice versa on that, right? Because different ways to do it. I always said that's the way I was as a kid with math, which you could explain math to me. My dad could sit next to me before all the cool AI stuff my daughter has now. My dad could sit next to me and say math 100 different ways. My brother was 2.5 years older, who had more recently gone through those math programs, could walk up to me finally, probably because he was tired of hearing my dad try to explain it at the kitchen table. My dad was doing the best he could, but my brother go up and go, no, look, it's like this. And I go, oh, is that all we're talking about? And of course, that was frustrating to my dad, who had spent 30 minutes trying to do it. But, it's all different. When I used to teach at karate and CrossFit, it was like sometimes you had to go with a tactile. Sometimes you would go with explaining. Sometimes you had to have somebody mimic you. Sometimes they had to teach it back to you. And I think it's a mixture of all those things that help us kind of feel out, like, how do we keep our eye on the prize of what's coming? To your point, Andy, about like mixture of agents, while also being able to look at the minuscule changes today. But what I think you have to do, and Beth and Jimmy, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. What I feel like you have to do is, yes, you can't get too bogged down unless you want to be an expert and a specialist in one area, in which case double down in that area. Like, be the best at N8N or image generation or whatever it is as a subset of AI, and be the best at it, because there's probably a path forward for you, and do things you love anyway. So like, I hope people do that. But the other side of it is like, I'm always thinking with the show and everything else, okay, this is a great idea. And then I do my best to try to project, or I'll use Perplexity or Claude or ChatGPT and any tool I can get my hands on, certainly the deep research tools. And I'll say, this is where I'm thinking of this, but I bet you I have blinders on, because that would be normal. So if I have blinders on and I'm looking at it through this viewpoint, what am I not seeing outside of my peripheral? What is just to the side of me that I'm not focusing on? And I really try to use AI to do that, to say like, what am I not thinking about that could potentially be me painting ourselves in a future corner? And I think that's how, like, when I look at Allie's, and we can play Allie's TikTok video and stuff like that, but that's how I sort of think about this. Is like, yes, there's the little things, and those are important, and some of those are like shiny objects and we go squirrel on them. But then there's also like, okay, but still, what is our future path here? And it's going to be agents talking to agents, and these things, and like, how do I make sure I'm still preparing for that future, even if I'm sort of like thinking about Claude going from 3.5 to 3.7? I don't know. Does that make sense, Beth? Or, Beth, I guess.
Yes, absolutely makes sense. And actually, one of the things that you're talking about is something that Allie shared last year. So 2024, part of their workflow was to have meetings with clients, and then immediately afterwards, share that recording. So it was a recorded transcript at that time. I don't think Zoom was doing its transcript, or that maybe Fathom was as good as it is now, but share that and immediately say, what do we miss? What did you notice that that is an opportunity that wasn't elicited in this conversation, right? Like, so you are using AI to amplify what is possible for you, because it is so fast and so good at being able to see the multiplicity, right? Another thing that that she talks about that I find really, really interesting in the concept of like having an AI first approach to whatever it is that you do, and she talked about this in like planning meetings or that kind of stuff, that there are times maybe everybody gets stuck, maybe it's just like a good place we want to do that, pause the meeting, everybody goes and talks to their AI of choice, right? Everybody goes on mute, you're still in the meeting, but everybody goes and has like whatever conversation they need to have for the period of time, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever that is. And now we come back more like focused, energized, clarified based on that conversation. And just think about how powerful that is. And the thing for me is that so there are things that give energy and there are things that suck energy, right? That conversation gives me energy again. I did not have to, after the hour-long meeting, listening to my delightful co-hosts, I didn't have to come up with how I want to phrase this to make sense, right? I can just go, okay, this is the idea. I've heard these things. Make this a clear message for me that I can deliver. Those are the parts that I think are energy givers, personally.
It's a good way to put it.
Well, I think for the larger question, I tend to look at information aggregation as try to do it at different layers or different levels, right? And this is probably from my IT experience and things like that. It's what affects me or is important to me locally, regionally, nationally, if you're going to use an analogy. So I guess growing your info cloud essentially is what's around you day to day, what you need to know, right? And then it comes down to here it becomes more subject matter focused, right, on the next layer, and then finally a more holistic view. So just broad strokes of how to approach that. And so the way I maintain to make sure there isn't like burnout or try to maintain no distractions in that method is you kind of move between the layers to gain your understanding, right? So for example, if I find it important to my day to day, how is AI important there? And so those are the kinds of things that I want to learn, right? Whether that be like AI first. Is this like in my meetings? Am I learning a new tool? Those kinds of things. Is this going to affect me right now? It's the closest touch points. And then beyond that is, I need to make sure I know this layer or this subject because it's important, right? If it's something like a subject that we haven't really covered on the show too much or expands upon that or it's something new, that's kind of where that lives. And then on the holistic level, I think it's important to connect. If we're talking about AI specifically, it's good to connect it with the larger world, right? So this is where you want to learn stuff that's outside of AI. And then that is connected back to AI. How is that going to affect that thing, right? Is it a global news, a national news? It's something shifting that I don't have a real connection to, but I can trace that, or I have that thought or that line to it. I've pulled the red string on my map of crazy to it and go, okay, well, how does AI connect to that? Or how will it affect that eventually? And I guess you're just switching what kind of lens or what you're looking at. So I know that's kind of confusing as an analogy. It's hard to picture sometimes, but have you ever seen an orrery or know what an orrery is? So just, I don't want to go too deep into it, but it's it's an archaic device that was used in its early instances where or iterations to try and track movement of celestial bodies and other things. And it's supposed to provide insight on the movement of these larger, points of interest. And so that's the kind of the way I look at it. It's like, this is my orbit. It's my direct orbit. This is like, if I'm the Earth, this is the moon, right? And then outside that, this is my solar system. And then outside that is, here's the Oort cloud, and finally the rest of the galaxy and things like that. So maybe that's a better analogy.
I have a similar one, Jimmy. It's so I know I talked about CrossFit a lot and stuff like that, and that could probably be a drinking game. But here's the thing with CrossFit, beyond the fact that I opened the gym and I like doing the CrossFit and stuff, I actually really got into the teachings behind CrossFit. And that came from the founder, who's a guy named Greg Glassman. Greg is a bit of an outspoken person and has gotten himself in trouble, is now not necessarily directly involved with CrossFit, but it doesn't take away the fact that like his parents were like rocket scientists and this is a smart guy, right? He comes from the gymnastics background. He has tons and tons and tons of teachings that sort of, for lack of a better term, make up the space dust that makes CrossFit. And one of the things that really, many things, sickness, wellness, fitness continuum, and others. But one thing, as you were saying, that stuck out was he would often say, in terms of getting better at CrossFit, that you're weakest at the margins of your abilities, right? So if you just think of that orbit that you're talking about and you expand out from the middle is whatever we're experts. We personally feel experts at. And it could be anything. It could be making eggs. It doesn't matter, right? Because that changes all the time, whatever that is. And then as you expand away from that, sure, maybe my daughter is able to make basic things in a frying pan. She can turn on the heat at 14. She can make it. She can clean the pan. Right. But then if we expand out from that, like that idea that she's weakest in her abilities at the margins of her abilities, right? On those out parts. And then you have lots of other things that overlap it. So it's a lot of these like overlapping circles. So the idea being that go find out where your margins are. And this could be a great like brainstorming session with any of the AI tools to do that in voice mode, as a matter of fact, in advanced voice mode. just talking about what you feel like you know, what you feel like you have a good grasp of, whatever that is in AI, and then saying, okay, help me plot out where I'm weakest. What am I missing? What are the parts that start to get a little fuzzy? And then what you might want to do is decide, okay, in the larger context of what, as Allie K. Miller was saying on it, what are the bigger priorities for me? I work at Scaled. I'm on the Daily AI show. So my priorities are different than yours, Jimmy or Andy, right? We're at different parts of our careers, different things like that. What are my priorities as I project out to the best of my ability? I'm 47. I'll work for at least the next 20 years of my life and probably beyond that. And so as I have 20 years of probably professional working experience to some extent where I'm taking in an income, give or take, okay, where are my priorities? And then layer in the things for family and jobs and security and all the things. And then I think once you sort of map that out, and again, I think this would be an amazing conversation with like advanced voice mode or something. I think from there, you start to plot out the places where perhaps you should spend a little more time, because now you're aligning with your larger global priorities while also pinpointing the things that are at the edges of your abilities. And it's the gray areas that perhaps should have a little bit stronger flashlight pointed on them with a little wider scope that goes a little farther into the field, right? I can throw on my high beams and I can see a little farther ahead than I could before. It's illuminating those ideas and concepts for me. And that conceptually, that's how I think about this, how I keep my priorities in line and think about my career over the next 20 years. And as it applies to AI, while also making sure that I'm focusing on the things that are going to actually have an impact for me going in that direction. And let's be honest, in AI, a lot of it's a guess. It's a really good educated guess is what we do on the show all the time. We put a really good educated guess on what we think is coming next, because we have a pretty good flashlight, but we don't necessarily have super high beams. And so we can see a little bit, but we can't see everything.
And we're holding the flashlight, right? So it's that personal
right. Yeah, you can direct
again.
it. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, when looking at this show, I keep hearing the phrase, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I think that is a real key in this context of like, okay, so what matters to you? What matters to you outside of AI, right? Like, what are the things that are like, you would do this for free? And that's very funny for all of us. But let's just say, for me, it is the experience of getting out the brilliance that someone sees based on their own like line through life, right? Being able to elicit that and then apply that as a filter, as a concept, as like a knowledge that makes them really good at this particular process, which makes them really ideal for that career trajectory, those kinds of things. That's super interesting for me. So I bring that lens to everything that I do with AI. It was the first thing that attracted me to it. And everybody has that individual thing. And I do think that when people start to feel like, oh my God, it's overwhelming, I just can't keep track of it all. Like, first, hear you 100%.
Yeah.
The Daily Show is like, is an amazing partner, but also it is, I think, a signal for me that I've moved away from what my North Star is. And I think that's really, really key for people who are moving through this. What is your North Star? What matters in this? If I only have 5 minutes, what am I reading about?
I think that's a great point, a great way to put that. I was thinking yesterday as I was reading about agent to agent, which I thought about talking, like just pausing for tomorrow because we're talking about Google, but I think tomorrow is more about Gemini, although agent to agent, I think, is a good announcement that came out of it. And I don't know about you guys, you guys, but collectively, everybody listening to this today, I learned so well through analogies and metaphors and stories. And I know that's not unique or anything, but if you've listened to me for any period of time over the 39, there it is. Because tomorrow would be an even number, 90, 40 rather. if you've listened to me on this show over the last year and a half or so, that I will often say, oh, you know what I think that's like? Or I'll listen to one of y'all and I'll say, oh, you know what that makes me think of? And that's why, honestly, it's not like I will talk about firefighting and CrossFit because that's where my brain lives. It's not that I even do those jobs anymore, but I had thousands upon thousands of experiences in that environment. And so it's easier for me to connect the dots and make the neurons connect for me when I go, well, this is like this. And that's no different really than a child understanding that there's a ball in the sky. And then the analogy I always heard for that one was a file folder. A child, as they're growing, has a file cabinet that has lots of like hanging file dividers in it, but it's kind of like ball, sun is a ball. But then they learn, right? And then they get the idea and concept of a sky. And then you go, oh, we can put a new folder in there. We can subdivide now. And we subdivide until you have a really condensed, packed, and over your life. Hopefully you have this really rich, condensed, but like just insightful multi-folder filing cabinet that you've built on. That's your knowledge, right? So anyway, I was thinking about this A to A. So let me just break this down really quick because we've talked a lot on the show about model context protocol. And I think there's a good connector here to what we're talking about. All right. So we've been talking about model context protocol. It's from Anthropic. We've sort of talked, I don't know, we had a whole show about it. But I'll connect these two in a second. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, like yesterday, Google's like, hey, we have A to A, agent to agent. And by the way, it plays nicely with MCP. Now, this is the second time in 2 days where we've said, ooh, I think MCP is a growing trend here, where we were initially talking, and maybe it will be overrun, but we were initially talking about it being, is it a Betamax to a VHS? I don't know. We'll see. And then we sort of saw OpenAI say, like, we'll play with MCP. And now you have Google say, hey, we built something that works great with MCP. So how does this work? Well, initially, I think of my dad's stories. I was lucky in the sense that my dad had a 9 to no, he's probably in there at 7, but he worked for Delta Airlines. He was when he retired, he was basically the vice president of Delta Airlines of all worldwide base maintenance, for lack of a better definition of that. My dad had risen up to like the top 15 people in the company at that time in like 2005. But before that, he'd worked in mechanics and in the engine bays and all the stuff, right? He went blue collar to white collar and the whole thing. So some of my favorite memories, both at Delta and earlier when he was at TWA and Western and things like that, as a kid, were going into the big engine, the mechanics bays where the planes would be working on. I mean, there's nothing cooler than being a kid and looking up at these massive planes that have an engine removed. And they'd be like, this is what we're doing, right? It had like such an impact on me. So I started thinking about that. And I started thinking about like, well, how we got this MCP thing. And now I've got, like Andy was saying, now I got to know this A to A thing. Why is that important? Well, here's the deal, right? Because it goes back to what you were saying, Andy, about this future of agents. And this is how I keep my eye on the prize of the things that matter. All right. If you have the mechanic shop at Delta Airlines, you have specialists in there. You have people who are great at welding. You have people who are great at diagnostics with engines. Not only that, but 727, 747, all the different types of planes, the McDonnell Douglas ones, MDs, all those, right? You also have people who are great at sheet metal repair and all that. So you have these agents. Our mechanics are our agents. MCP, as I think about it, is like the current or the electricity walking through. It's every mechanic having the knowledge that it's universal to every mechanic that says, not only does everybody have the same connector, so there's no tool in here that now has some one-off connector. We've all gone USB-C. We've all gone, Ryobi with the click one tools where you can put the same battery pack in the same tools. Not only that, MCP says, here's where every tool is in every bay. Even better than that, it's saying that every mechanic in there has a key card, and they go, pop, when they want to use that tool because they know where it is. Universally, every mechanic, every agent knows where it is. Okay. Mm-hmm. They're all able to use the same connector. So nobody has to fuddle around with how does this connect to that? They all work, right? Universally. And they have token authorization with their key card that says, hey, don't use this until I say it's okay to use this. And this is built all on like previously what we have with API.
Absolutely.
A to A is the next part of this where the agents talk to each other. A to A is the walkie-talkie system. It's the intercom in the mechanic shop that says, hey, I have all that information about I'm a mechanic, I'm an agent, and I have all that information about all the MCP stuff I just said. I know where every tool is instantly. I know that they're all going to work together. I'm the specialist and I do this thing with the engine. I need to order a part, and there's a foreman there, and the foreman's like, hey, good knowing that you have a delay on that report. All right, put that into that. And that agent tells the other mechanic's like, I can't do anything until we get the part in, because my role comes in right after that, but I know exactly where the tools are. So it's the communication aspect between all the different agents is what this A to A is going to do. So now we have MCP, the currency, like where all the tools are, how to use the tools, the connectors to it. And then we have A to A, which is hey, we can all now talk to each other and we all know how to interact with each other to move the goal forward.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I want to just bring into this conversation and say that I'm sure we will do another show on it, perhaps as soon as next week. But this is one of those pieces of an example of not getting blinded by what is shiny without like paying attention to what's important for you. Because one of the things that they say about MCP is that the S is for security. Yes. And so as we're walking around, we're like, we know where everyone is. There are some people on the side saying, does anyone notice no one has pants on anymore? Right? Like, we're super excited about all the things that we can do, but like, we're going to need some like coverings of our lower bits, everybody. So let's just figure out what that is as well. And I'm curious, Jimmy, security is one of your red strings of crazy. So I'm curious what you think about that, or coming back to burnout in that context, because I imagine from a security perspective, AI is a little like, hey.
Well, yes. To break it down, yes. In current traditional security methodologies, AI is a headache.
Nate Jones just said something really similar to that. That's why it made me laugh. Nate Jones like, I feel so bad for my security friends.
Yeah. Because the way that and this all really comes from this is the transitional period, right? AI is growing so quickly, things are being developed, it's Wild West, it's just all about moving forward, and holes and gaps are going to be forming and things like that, because the way our current system and methodologies exist is strict adherence, right? It's not flexible, it's not adaptive, not really. And so everyone plays the specific role and stays in the specific lane that they're in, and that's what provides structure, stability, and those are the key components of security. What I think we'll have to get back to is the more meta level of the concept of security. What is the real purpose for this security? And that's what it needs to go back to, because pretty much every high level or veteran security professional will tell you is security really is an illusion, right? If you have, so the common sayings are, if someone has physical access to your device, then it doesn't matter. If someone is motivated enough and has a singular purpose, it doesn't matter. And I'm not just talking about, IT, I'm just talking about security as a whole, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what needs to be done is go back to that base idea of what security is. What are you trying to accomplish on a holistic level, on a larger level, and then rebuild and transition to that point. Admittedly, we do have current laws and systems in place that you have to work with, and you have to adhere to, and things like that. And it's not going to be an easy job, especially for cybersecurity professionals, because it's going to have to change a complete change of philosophy, I think, on that. But in terms of where we're at right now, especially with some of the things that are being pointed out with vibe coding or and using things like MCP or these formats or whatnot. Security is a lower priority for the people who are developing. They want to use it, they want to make it better, and security is usually a follow-up between or after that. And we're starting to see where that conflict is coming up. Like someone vibe coded a product and now is selling subscriptions, and then they didn't go through a security assessment of their app, and now people are just like poking holes in it, making weird things happen, all those kinds of things. And so it's all about that transitional part, the growing pains of of moving along with it. So I think that's where that is. And so if we want to keep this in mind in general, is think of where we're at right now with all of these new tools, or something new comes out, right? In the facet from, or the point of view for security wise, just think you're in the development. You're in the development sandbox. You are not in production, right? Production means you have checked all the boxes, you've done all the due diligence, and it's ready to go out. AI is in the development stage. There might be a little bit you're pretty sure you can put into production, but grain of salt, all of those analogies and sayings, because we are moving so quickly. No matter what, if people say production, it's still in development. And
right,
I'll leave it at that.
That's like, so again, one of the things that Allie talks about is being willing to revamp your workflow, right? So that you have this process, but is it time to like just rebuild from the ground up, looking at what is capable, what the capabilities of the present moment are? But that doesn't mean losing your process, losing your ultimate, like, I would like to get from box here to box here, and right. I have these inputs. Now what's happening is underneath, how do those things get accomplished? Andy, I'm curious about your perspective on this.
Yeah, I want to touch on the two things. One, I want to just backpedal a little bit and elaborate a bit on the investment that Brian made in the analogy of the airline, maintenance bay, and say the way I think about that is that you've got Boeing in a large airline. You may have Boeing, Airbus, and McDonnell Douglas aircraft, right? So each one of those manufacturers has possibly used non-standard dimensions or screws or parts,
sure.
or that sort of thing. So each one of them is responsible for generating an MCP server that can be interrogated by an agent, an AI agent, to determine what is available in that bay for that particular aircraft. So the MCP server has been articulated by the airplane manufacturer. Then you've got agents that are going to use agent to agent. And one of those agents may be, that there's an agent from, the FAA that wants to explore what's happening with maintenance and supervise it. So it'll talk to an agent that's in the bay that has been made available to the FAA that can talk to each of the MCPs. These are the servers that have been built out there, and actually track what the transactions are in those. So there's all these things that are parts of a new kind of infrastructure for the communication among companies and their AIs. Like the AIs are taking over more and more of that. So that's the way I want to weave into the idea of what tools do you choose, and what's the right frame of mind when you're using AI in order to allow you to keep at least abreast of what you need to know in order to make sure that you're gaining productivity for yourself individually and for your communities, whether that's a corporation or whether it's a group of people who are collaborating on a startup. Those are the things that really are where the rubber meets the road. And so I want to just harken back to one of the things that you put into the show notes, Beth, which is what Allie was saying, which is specifically, let me quote this. It's choosing one model to play with can leave you behind because you're not attending to all of the advances that are happening among the many, many players out there in the field. But chasing every one of them can leave you exhausted and you just can't keep up with it. And I'll just use a little example of that. You know, there's two particularly competent agents that have been launched by China that really hit the news. One of them is called Manus, and the other one is GenSpark. And we've mentioned them on the show before. But each of those agents is like another level above the simple agency of a multi-agent architecture in a coding platform like Replit or Lovable or Bolt.new or Cursor or Windsurf, all those vibe coding platforms. It's a step beyond that actually could do something like, okay, I want to do this task. I want you to go out and find an MCP server that does it, and then connect to that MCP server and set up an N8N workflow that accesses that, or skip the N8N workflow. You don't need it. Just go ahead and manage that whole process yourself, Manus, or GenSpark, and they seem able to do that. But the weave back to how can you possibly keep up? Well, I signed up on the wait list for Manus a month ago. And about 2 weeks ago, they allowed me in. So they said, okay, you're invited. Now come on in. And I haven't found time yet to actually respond to that, sign up, and go experiment with it. I don't have time.
Same as me.
My day is overscheduled. So, you know, but I do have faith that eventually something like Manus or GenSpark is going to replace a lot of the tools that I just find overwhelming and taking too much of my time to implement, by allowing me to simply talk to that agent and have it choose all the tools, use all the protocols and infrastructure that are made available by agent to agent technology and or MCP technology that's being put out there by all the players who want agents to be able to access their tools. And so eventually it's going to be much easier. And so that introduces another thing that is a concept that's, I think, relevant to all of you who are worried about getting behind. And that is the waiting equation. If you wait long enough, it may be that you don't have to worry about all of those intervening steps to keep abreast, because the technology of AI is going to solve all of those things for you. Now, I wouldn't trust that 100%, but I would say that the waiting equation has proven itself in the context of AI for coding, because AI was very, very successful at code completion in various platforms like GitHub Copilot, for example. But the vibe coding tools that exist today, if you just waited 9 months, the vibe coding tools today, they don't just autocomplete. They go about and agentically build an app for you. And so I am a beneficiary of the waiting equation. Like, I never spent the time to figure out how to use GitHub Copilot, don't have time to actually even figure out those particular tools. But now I waited long enough that now there are tools available to me that allow me to build an application without having to concern myself with a lot of the very, very complex details that go into such an application build.
The other side of that, though, real quick, Andy, is with Sensei Data AI, which you've been working on. Had you waited 9 more months, I don't guarantee, right? You would never have spent as many hours building out what you did in like Bolt or Cursor or whatever, because we can assume that the coding would have gotten more advanced and better completion right off the bat, which meant you probably would have gotten something closer to what you're asking for without really having to go through the back and forth. Now, there's 2 ways to look at that. Would you have spent less hours getting to the same net result if you waited 9 months? Maybe we don't know, but we can assume with the advancements in coding. But you also would have lost out on all the education you got going through that process, which are definitely going to help you. That skill set is definitely going to help you moving forward as you move into even more advanced AI. So I see what you're saying about like you're the benefit of the waiting, but also we could just put a pin right now and say, yeah, but if you just waited 9 months to start Sensei AI, you wouldn't have gone through half the trouble you went through up until this point because there would be better tools available. But was that a loss for you? I would
Yeah,
say no.
you raise a very important point about familiarization and education. So that I've learned a lot in the process of, putting my nose to the grindstone and
Mm-hmm.
trying to accomplish some of these things early on. Like originally, Junmi and I tried to do this in build, ship, and Flutterflow. If
Yep.
you remember that, so it was
Yeah.
painful. It was very painful. And those tools were really quite advanced at their time, but they are really not as important anymore because of the standardization around some of the platforms, Python, JavaScript, etc., that the vibe coding type platforms are focusing on. So Flutterflow, anyway, I won't go on a tangent on Flutterflow, but it's a Google product that
Yeah.
is an application developer of its own. But I think it's basically by virtue of the weighting equation, it's being obviated by more advanced tools. But the truth is, if you're going to stay abreast of what's going on, you've got to be in the game. You've
Yeah.
got to be playing with whatever's available to you right now. And so maybe we could turn the conversation to what are the most valid tools that you can choose just to work with one, right? You can choose among the different options, but to work with one now and start to develop fluency in conversation with AI. That's the real skill, I think, that has to be built. And there's a special skill that's involved, a different kind of conversation that's much more akin to the communication between product managers and engineering teams that applies to vibe coding. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little more technical, but there's a lot of things that you can accomplish right now just in conversation with the most capable models. So let's talk about those models and how we've found them useful. I know that just recently we started a new project in the Daily AI Show, which I was surprised at the comprehensiveness of what the models made available to us in order to pursue that project. And that gets me to my final bit of advice is anything that you see as daunting and as a worthy task that's going to take you a lot of time, stop and think about how AI can help you do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Beth and I had a 45-minute conversation last night. And I won't say that we moved the needle forward in terms of like a building block was set in place and we're like, there it is. It was like Beth, your and I whole conversation was like, all right, hold on. How are you seeing this? Okay, how am I seeing this? How does this? And what did we end up doing at the end of it? Going like, okay, break, because we're both got to go off and do some other things with AI, and then we're going to come back together with that new knowledge, kind of like you were saying on the Zoom calls with the break. But that's exactly what we were doing last night. We had this whole conversation because you and I had time to work on this side project, but there was still some like communication and things that we were trying to work out. But then it's like, okay, great. We're at a stopping point now because you and I continuing on that conversation for another hour probably would not have netted anything significantly better. We knew this is a great place to go off and independently do AI research and building and things like that, because we're going to be richer for it coming back to the conversation because we just now superpowered ourselves. We leveled up with this AI enhancement that now we can bring into the conversation. So I want to stop there because otherwise we'll kind of get into the we'll tangent off of this and get into more of it, but we are kind of on time, so I'm going to pause it there. I do want to say because we've talked about it on the show and it's sort of a new announcement. Oh man, we got to check that background. Keep the conversation going for the show. Beth and everybody else have been working really hard to stand up a new community, and we went ahead and just made a easier URL to get to that Slack community. So if you want to keep the conversation going beyond this show, then come join the new Slack community just launched this week. And the way you can get to that is going to dailyaishowcommunity.com. That will just reroute you directly to the Slack login. If you have other Slack channels, then it'll be super easy for you to add this one as well. We'd love to have you. We know lots of people are excited about being able to talk beyond just when we have these live shows, and of course we want to support that as well. Also, don't forget, you can go to thedailyishow.com. We'll get this all organized and easier for everybody. For right now, that's where you go. You can sign up for the newsletter there. That goes out every Sunday. It's also another way for you to stay abreast of everything going on above and beyond these live shows that we do Monday through Friday. So just wanted to call all that out. Lots of different ways. We're growing the community. We're growing our network. So lots of different ways you can stay up to date and make sure that for whatever brings you joy, whatever your North Star is, as you said, Beth, then, hopefully you can find a resource within the dailyishow.com or the Daily Eye Show in general. And we can help you point in that direction to keep you focused on your North Star. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about Google and Gemini and all the sort of things that they've been releasing and announcing, and maybe ADA will come up in that, but it's really more about like what you can do with these models, why people are really excited about them, all the good stuff from Google, because they've really been really pushing on the AI side. And, it'll be good to take a pause and kind of look at what they're doing. So that's tomorrow's show. We're excited about it. Come back and hang out with us. Thanks to everybody in the comments as always. And we will see you again tomorrow. Bye.
Aloha.